podcast. I am your host, Khaled Abdallah, and I'm joined today by my good friend Naufil, who is a Boston sports fan. Today's topic is The Dynasty, which is a 10-part documentary on Apple TV Plus about the Patriots dynasty that spanned most of the 21st century. Today's episode is going to focus on 3 burning questions from the first 4 episodes. So we'll talk a little bit about what each episode was about and jump into the questions that we had coming out of each episode. So before we jump in, Naufil, tell us, why are you a Boston sports fan, and why were you the man to discuss this documentary series with me?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I've been listening to your podcast for the better part of the past year, and always learning something new. I think you have a great diversity of guests. So when this documentary started, I'm like, you know what? Let me just hit you up and see if you had an idea to do that. And sure enough, you did. And I think I was first mover advantage. I think I literally hit you up when it was first announced, and now here we are. So yeah, so I was born in Boston in the early '80s. Whether I was raised or not, we moved to Dallas when I was about 12, so that's debatable. But my
That
introduction to
counts.
sports, thank you, was Boston sports. So and in Boston, just like in Dallas, it's super fanatical, right? You got the baseball, football, basketball, and of course hockey. When I grew up, I think the Celtics probably were the biggest team, which makes sense because they were winning. And then you had probably the Red Sox as a close second, getting to the World Series, of course, 1986. People don't actually remember in 1986, the Red Sox blew that World Series, but 11 months earlier, the Patriots got blown out in the Super Bowl. It was the 85 season, but the Patriots actually got to the Super Bowl in January of 86, where the Bears decimated them 46-10. So, I was too young to remember those games, but I remember obviously kind of, waking up, seeing my dad who watched those games, obviously like, in a bad mood, etc. So that year, 86 was interesting because you had both the Patriots and the Red Sox losing championship games, and then the Celtics winning it. So 86 was their last title before, of course, 2008 with Doc Rivers and that. So basically been a Boston fan. I would say, to be fair, that I'm probably more of a Cowboys fan now because I've been in Dallas the last 30 years. So just from a time perspective, been in Dallas a lot more. And probably I have to thank the Cowboys for that, because when I moved to Dallas, 3 out of the next 4 seasons, they won the Super Bowl. They probably did a lot while the Mavericks were losing 70 games a year. But yeah, I just want people to know that it is true. I am born in Boston, so I don't just rep them because they're winning. And I'm a fan of them even now. They're struggling, and probably in the next podcast we'll talk about where they go from here. I have some theories, but it's a long road back to get to where they were, if they ever get back.
Yeah, you kind of hit the fan jackpot, right? You got the 80s with the Celtics, and then in the 90s you had the Cowboys, and then the 2000s you got the Patriots. So I'm not 100% sure how I feel about dual loyalties like this, but you know what? It is what it is, man. Whatever makes you happy.
Appreciate that, man.
Yeah, do your thing, man. So let's jump into the documentary. So as we mentioned, this is a 10-part series covering the span of the Patriots dynasty from its inception with their first Super Bowl in 2001 all the way through the departure of Tom Brady in, what was it, 2020 or 2021? Whatever year it was.
That's right, 2020, and then he won the Super Bowl the very next year in Tampa Bay. So have some thoughts about that too.
I'm sure they'll talk about that on episode 10, but we'll start with episode 1. So episode 1 was called Backup Plan, and the episode synopsis is, after Drew Bledsoe suffers a devastating injury, Robert Kraft and Bill Belichick put the hopes of the franchise in 6th round draft pick Tom Brady. So this basically covers the Bledsoe injury, the first couple games of the Tom Brady era, and it talks a little bit about Bob Kraft buying the team in the early 90s. But our first, burning question here is, before this season and before they won that Super Bowl, the Patriots were always kind of a joke of a franchise. They had a couple Super Bowl appearances, but for the most part, were not that great of a franchise. They almost moved to Hartford at some point. There was relocation being discussed. So what did Bob Kraft do differently, even before the Belichick and Brady era, that previous Patriots owners didn't do?
So I have a theory about this. Now, I think it may be discussed. It's not very popular. My personal theory is he bought the organization in 1994. I want to get my facts right. I believe it was January or February, but very early in 1994. That was actually coming off the heels of the Cowboys having gone back-to-back against Buffalo. They won Super Bowl 28 and then Super Bowl 27 and then 28. And clearly these guys meet at the meetings. He knew who Jerry Jones was. Sorry about that. Yeah, etc. So I feel personally that Bob Kraft bought the Patriots because he wanted to turn the franchise around and run it like a business the way he felt Jerry Jones did that. He felt like,
Hmm.
hey, literally 5 years ago, Jerry Jones buys the 1-15 Cowboys for a 1-15, for $150 million. Also, sort of the laughing stock, right? Worst record in the league. Hire some good, coaches, general managers, does amazing trades, gets them to the Super Bowl, wins 3 out of 4. Now, of course, when he bought them, they had only won 2, but back to back, I personally think Robert Kraft felt this could be duplicated in New England. And so if you even look at one of the episodes, they refer to it, he didn't actually buy the team first. He bought the stadium because he knew that was where the money was, in the parking every Sunday, right? That's where the money was. And so because he had the rights to the stadium, he was essentially the only bidder when the team went up for sale. He basically monopolized it, and there's nobody else to put up that money. And he's
Hmm.
very successful in business, right? The Kraft Group, now it's billion dollars. Back then it was probably getting there. So I personally, my theory is that the reason they were successful is when he bought them, he essentially turned it into a business that I believe previous owners didn't do. Maybe they didn't have the capital, maybe they didn't have the patience or whatnot. But when you look at
Hmm.
guys like Jerry Jones, Robert Kraft, these are guys that are millionaires and now billionaires, right? That have that capital and that patience to do that. So I think it was pretty unique. But there were definitely speed bumps along the way. It was not smooth, right? And we see
Hmm.
that, right? He didn't get along with Bill Parcells. Now, clearly, he has a lot of things to say about Bill Belichick. At the time, he was sort of quiet because they kept winning. But at the end of the day, it reminds me of, Jerry Jones and Jimmy Johnson, right? I mean, the guy
Yeah.
wins, 2 out of 3 Super Bowls, and then they let him go, and then his backup Barry Switzer comes in and wins. So those two guys, to me, are sort of the epitome of businessmen who try to duplicate it into there. And then I'll be honest with you, now that the Patriots dynasty is over, I personally do feel you're going to have a period of 30 years where they never win, just like the Cowboys haven't won since '96. That's my theory. Let's see if I'm
Okay.
proven wrong. But the
Yeah.
Cowboys have not been back to even a conference championship since
Hmm.
1996. It'll be 30 years next year. So making the playoffs great, but in Dallas we count rings, right? So I think definitely it'll be interesting to see. I personally am very pessimistic about the Patriots' future, but again, we'll talk about that next time.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. I think this era is probably when teams started going from kind of mom and pop shops to actual businesses. They started becoming worth, billions with a B versus, 150 million or whatever it was that Jerry Jones bought the Cowboys for, and they were still a prestige franchise at the time. So I think you see in the 90s and the 2000s, the teams that operate like that are the ones that are winning. The teams like, the Raiders or some of the other teams that still operated like a mom and pop shop kind of fell by the wayside because of that change. So I think that's a great call out. So the next question I have for you is, the big question or the big incident in this episode was Drew Bledsoe's devastating, chest, heart injury, whatever you want to call it.
Horrible, horrible.
And they talked about him as, being the franchise savior. He had a Super Bowl appearance under his belt at that point. But I looked at, some of his statistics leading up to this season, and he was kind of falling off a little bit as he was hitting his late 20s, early
Yeah.
30s. So what was your opinion of Drew Bledsoe before this year, before that devastating injury that he suffered?
That's a great question. Let's go back to how Kraft ran it as a business. I think paying Drew Bledsoe $100 million into the year 2000 was a bad business decision, right? That was an unprecedented amount of money, right, for a quarterback at that time. I think he was the first quarterback in history to make $100 million. Robert Kraft saw Drew Bledsoe as his fifth son, if you will, right? It was personal. And I think you got to separate feelings from business. Robert Kraft didn't. Now, flash back, Drew Bledsoe was the number 1 pick in the draft, and he was rightfully so. This was not like a Peyton Manning, Ryan Leaf situation where they went with the wrong pick, or a Greg Oden in the NBA situation versus Durant. He was clearly the best player in college coming out in '93, so they made the right choice. And 2 years later, he got into a Super Bowl. But that was not his first injury. He got hurt in '96, and then I think he got hurt again, not as devastating, where he was on his basically life support, but pretty bad. So he was sort of, I think, on the back end of his prime. He was not on his prime. And that's number one, why I feel they drafted Brady. And look at the dichotomy of the two, right? 6th round, 199th pick versus 1st round, number 1 pick. But yet they just paid this guy $100 million and they're drafting a quarterback. So Drew Bledsoe was kind of like, you're sending me mixed signals, right? And if you remember, that
Yeah.
was Tom Brady's being drafted was Bill Belichick's decision because Bill Belichick handled the draft. Obviously, Robert Kraft knew about it. He probably had to get approval per se, but I think at that point in the franchise
Hmm.
relationship, Robert Kraft's like, "Do your thing, man." I think
Yeah.
personally, Bill Belichick didn't want to pay Brady, but I think that was where Robert Kraft is. Hey, I'm going to pull rank as owner. We're paying this
Hmm.
guy. He's our guy. So when he did get hurt, unfortunately for him and fortunately for Brady, it presented Belichick with the perfect time to put him in. I don't think Belichick in
Yeah.
his right mind could have put
I would
Brady in
say
if Belichick get hurt.
let's save some of that for episode 2 because there's
Sure.
another Bledsoe question.
Sure.
But yeah, I think you're spot on. He was the number 1 pick. He was the franchise quarterback, but he'd taken his lumps along the way, and they hint at that a little bit in episode 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was obviously a good, maybe great quarterback for his era, kind of statuesque, big guy who could throw it down the field and well deserved getting that, maybe not that $100 million contract, but well deserved being the franchise guy in New England. So the last question is related to Bill Belichick and his stint in Cleveland. So they talk about it in this episode where he faced a similar decision where he wanted to release Bernie Kosar.
Yeah.
It was a very unpopular move with the fans, and he ends up, it doesn't work out for him. He ends up being run out of town, out of Cleveland. So what lessons did Belichick pick up from that stint in Cleveland that he was able to carry on to, the dynasty in New England?
So it's funny. Bill Belichick was run out of Cleveland by the owner, but then he also ended up, Cleveland was run out as well. They basically left the city and had to start again. So double the ramifications of that. Again, same thing. Think of Bernie Kosar with the Browns as this beloved figure, never won the big game, got to a few AFC championships. Denver broke their heart so many times in the 80s, right? And Bernie Kosar was at the helm then, similar to sort of Drew Bledsoe. And before I answer what he learned from there, Nick Saban was actually on his coaching staff. So now, flash forward 25 years, you essentially have what people pretty much non-debate saying the greatest college coach and the greatest professional coach, both on the same franchise, coaching pros. Pretty kind of cool tidbit, and it didn't work out. Clearly, they didn't win games. They did, however, beat the Patriots in the playoffs with Bledsoe as the quarterback. So I'm sure
Yep.
a little bit in the back of his mind, I can't do Bill Belichick's voice, but he's probably thinking, Bledsoe, not that good. We beat him, right? So there's probably a little bit of that. But I think the lessons he learned is that, look, you need to have a good quarterback. Bernie Kosar was not the answer. And then the guy they brought in to replace him, I don't even remember. So my mistake for that. Sorry, Cleveland fans. It was some no-name. My point is, and there's that joke, right? Cleveland's had so many quarterbacks since then. There's like a whole, history of that. So you need a quarterback. I think that's the number one lesson he learned, which is why, even though they paid Bledsoe $100 million, he's like, I got to get another quarterback as a backup. Hence the episode title, Backup Plan. I think he learned that.
Mm-hmm.
I think number two, he learned the importance, right, which is sort of ironic when you think about it, of defense. Bill Belichick has always been a defensive-first coach. He won 2 Super Bowls in the 1980s with the New York Giants as the defensive coordinator under Bill Parcells. And again, we'll get into that later, but he was always the defensive gem. To me, his greatest defensive performance wasn't actually when he was with the Patriots. It was actually Super Bowl 25 with the Giants when he held the Buffalo Bills to 19 points. This was a team, I'm just going to say it once and then I'll shut up, that beat your Raiders 51-3 the week before. Offensive powerhouse. They had the K-gun, Jim Kelly distributing the wide receivers, just opening up the field. Bill Belichick held them to 19 points and they won the Super Bowl. So he was always a defensive-minded coach. I think he realized defense wins championships. It's no longer the case in the NBA, maybe not even in the NFL. We've seen Super Bowls in the 30s and the 40s, but back then, it still rang true. And I think that's the biggest lesson he learned after getting a good quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of that. But to me, it was, don't make a not crazy, but just a big franchise altering decision without having the backup plan, as you said, which is
100%.
referenced in the title of the
100%.
episode. So the next episode is called The Snow Bowl. So this is in reference to the famous Tuck Rule game. It's known as the Tuck Rule game just about everywhere else, except for the New England area where they call it the Snow Bowl. But the episode synopsis is Belichick shocks the world by doubling down on Brady. An icy showdown with the Oakland Raiders redefines what's possible for the Patriots. So this talks about Drew Bledsoe being healthy again, and Belichick still sticking with the young guy in Tom Brady. And then obviously it wraps up with the famous, Snow Bowl / Tuck Rule game and all that. So, but it also talks about Tom Brady and his descent in the draft. So the question for you is, from looking at it, Brady was pretty good at
Yeah,
Michigan. I think he was back and forth with, I think he backed up Brian Greasy, and
yep,
then he was back and forth with, I think it was Drew Henson,
it was.
the guy
Yep.
who played baseball, and then, ended up playing for the Cowboys a little later in his career. But he was good. He won the Rose Bowl. He was a good
Yep.
quarterback. And he was big and slow, which is exactly what you looked for in a quarterback in
That's
the
right.
1990s.
Absolutely.
So why did he fall to the 199th overall pick?
That is probably the one question I don't have a good answer for. So to your point, exactly. And I want to just mention the team he beat was Alabama. Now that was not Alabama of today, but still a very powerful SEC team. The only explanation, bro, I can give you is that was a fairly loaded class for quarterbacks. I think you had like Chad Pennington, again, coming out of college, were good. A couple other guys I should remember because he remembers clearly all the six that he was the sixth or seventh taken. There was a lot. I personally think he did not have a good combine. Now, the interesting thing is now the combine literally defines your future. At that time, it was important, but maybe not the most important thing. But I think that was around the time where people were paying a lot more attention to your sprints, right? Funny story, which I just saw this morning, so I'm glad I saw it before this podcast. Brady ran a quicker 40 at the age 46 than he did at 22. I mean, that to me tells it all, right? The guy run faster as a 46-year-old than he does as a 20-year-old rookie. He hasn't played in the NFL in 2 seasons, right? So he was slow. But to your point, that's true. Slow quarterbacks were not, that didn't hurt you the way it does now. He could throw it, he could sling it. I guess the only explanation I can think of is maybe they felt like, hey, this guy wasn't the bona fide, clear cut starter in college the way Drew Bledsoe was, right? Coming out of Washington State, essentially as a sophomore through senior, won 11 games a year, won bowl games. Brady had quarterback competition. And so he's thinking probably the Patriots organization is, Michigan, good pedigree, good team. If they're having doubts about Brady being the guy, why should we invest in that? And I think other teams picked that. But to Belichick's credit, he was willing to take a flyer and a risk on that. And at 199, why not, right? How many
Mm-hmm.
199 picks do you see become the GOAT, right? None. So clearly, I think that was it. I think college, that kind of hurt him, but also
Mm-hmm.
just that speed, right? If you're looking at the guy, he does not look like when he's running, it's like this. Do you want this guy to be chasing, running after us? So again, not the best answer, but I'd be curious, man. Let me throw it back to you. What do you think?
Yeah.
You know this pretty well too.
Honestly, I think everything that you said, right, about this being a quote unquote loaded quarterback class. I think the fact that he was not the clear cut starter, that he was, doesn't have any crazy measurables, but he looks the part as a traditional pocket passing quarterback. He's what, 6'4", 6'5". Like, he was kind of lean and lanky, but again, like, that's what most quarterbacks looked for. I mean, people made fun of his 40 time. I don't know what Drew Bledsoe's 40 time was, but I can't imagine it was much better
True.
than Tom Brady's. So I think it's just one of those things where, you start to fall a little bit, and then other teams just grab a quarterback, and there's only so many quarterback spots. And,
Yeah.
at some point there's no real difference to me. There's no like functional difference between being a fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round pick. Like, it's
Yeah.
all the same thing, right? And he just happens to end up in the right place. And I think as a testament to him and his attitude, obviously things worked out really well for him in New England, but I think the type of person that he is, the type of insane competitor that he is, I think he would have succeeded anywhere. So,
That's a great point. And the one footnote I want to add, I know we've got to
mhm,
jump to the next episode, but real quick, I think also at that time, it was very different. Today, I mean, look at it right now. Like every quarterback, essentially, except for maybe 3 or 4, their job is in jeopardy every season. They have to earn it again. People are
mhm,
thinking, do I trade my quarterback? Do I pick a player? I think back then in the early 2000s, for the most part, teams kept their quarterback, right? Until they either got hurt or they retired. So I also think the number of teams that may have needed a starter at that time compared to today was much less. And clearly the Patriots didn't need a quarterback. They had Bledsoe, but they're like, hey, we'll take a backup. But
mhm,
again, that's visionary, right? To have a backup for that very backup plan that happened. So I just wanted to add
yeah,
that.
for sure. So I hinted at this during our last episode, but
Yeah.
the majority of the episode before we get into the Tuck rule is, Bill Belichick doubling down on Tom Brady, not playing Drew Bledsoe again, despite him being cleared for action. Brady, I think, was close to 500 as a starter. Um, he loses a high profile game at home to the Rams, which of course is relevant for the, the next episode. But the question that I had was looking at Bledsoe's stats, looking at the player that he was at that point, and they talked about, oh, he was afraid of contact, that sort of thing. Aside from the contract, was it really that ballsy to bench Drew Bledsoe? Like, if it was just a straight up performance evaluation of this guy, the last couple seasons has been, in the 50s with his completion percentage. He's throwing a ton of interceptions. He's been hurt. So was it that ballsy?
That's a great question. And I think the narrative on that over the years, as most narratives do, has sort of changed. I think at the time when they won the 3 Super Bowls out of 4 years, and then of course they had that 10-year period where they didn't, but at the time it was considered, what are you doing? This is the dumbest decision ever, $100 million franchise. But now when you look back on it, a couple of things that you said. Yes, his metrics, if you will, and again, football is not the kind of analytic sport the way baseball is, but it's getting there, right? Analytics are important. They look at numbers. He was on the back end of his career. I alluded to that in the first episode. So he was definitely, in Belichick's eyes, again, he's the decision maker, not the guy who's going to get us back to the Super Bowl. Now, in Belichick's eyes, Brady wasn't either, but he's like, hey, let's give that guy a chance. Going back to your question, the Patriots were 5-5 after that loss. This is when only 6 teams made the playoffs. They did not have 7 the way they do now. 10-6, most likely that year, probably would not have gotten them in. They may have been fighting for a wild card, maybe not. They essentially had to win out. And that's why it was even, to me, a bigger deal, because he essentially, Drew Bledsoe was cleared, I believe, for the week after that Rams game, or maybe week 7, week 11. So he was ready to come back. But
so he was cleared for the Rams game, which maybe that was too soon to get him back in right away. But yeah, he was cleared for that Rams game. And the way Brady played
that game, 2 interceptions. He did not have a good game. The question becomes, could Drew Bledsoe have won that game? To me, the benching Drew Bledsoe and not putting him in that game, I think could have gone either way. I think the bigger deal was, after Brady had such a poor performance, like you said, doubling down, sticking with him. But I do think, looking back now, yes, it was risky, but I don't think it was this life-changing decision that Bill Belichick should be given credit for the way he used to. I mean, it was a business decision, and he went with, who he felt had the hotter hand, like you do in baseball or basketball, right? I mean, it just happened to be a big decision because it's the quarterback, which is the most important position in the NFL. But it wasn't a shoo-in, I would say, either way. It was risky, but not this mind-blowing thing that, oh my goodness, what are you doing, to be honest?
Yeah, exactly. I think the little bit of hindsight makes it a more reasonable decision. And I hinted a couple times at his statistics. So in 99 and 2000, he had a 56% completion percentage, 58 completion percentage. He threw for 3,900 yards and 3,200 yards. So, nothing special. And over those 2 years, he combined for 36 touchdowns and 34 interceptions.
Wow.
So
that's telling.
He was not lighting the world on fire. And I think you hinted at Kraft loving Bledsoe, but I think an objective evaluation would have been like, this guy's not worth $100 million. This guy's maybe not even worth $50 million. And Brady just gave them the kind of escape hatch for that. The last question here. This is a big one for me. I am a Raiders fan.
Yes, you are.
The Tuck Rule game was not the first playoff run that I remember, but I was about 12 years old watching this.
Right.
And it's the first time that sports made me cry as a fan.
Yeah.
We don't need to, relitigate the Tuck Rule itself, but basically, had that been called a fumble or the call been upheld, the Raiders would have kneeled 3 times and won the game and gone on to face the Steelers in the AFC Championship game. Ultimately, to you, what is the legacy of the Tuck Rule, the snowball game? Initially, when I was looking at it, as a kid or a little bit younger, I thought, if they lost that Tuck Rule game, Drew Bledsoe would have came back, and Tom Brady would never have been who he was. But I think now that we know that it was Brady or bust at that point, I think the dynasty still lives on.
Sure.
Maybe just starts a little bit later. But for you, what's the ultimate legacy of this snowball / Tuck Rule game?
So you are very gracious in describing it like that without, using any expletives or cursing. I loved that actual documentary that ESPN had with Tom Brady and Charles Woodson, right? Both Michigan guys, right? By the way, they were there around the same time. I don't think they were there all the same years, but they overlapped a little bit. Charles Woodson makes the hit, fumbles the ball, and then you know it better than me. Was it Romanowski or somebody got it? But essentially, Charles
Woodson Greg Biekert. I'll never forget.
Biekert, well done. And when Tom Brady himself is admitting that it should have been a fumble, like, to me, that ends the debate, right? Like, there's still Patriots homers, Bill Simmons, all these guys, David Portnoy, all that. No, the guy who played in the game said that was a fumble. Whatever the rule is, like, it was a bad call. So personally, I first wanted to say, as a Patriots fan, it was the wrong outcome. but it's not the only game to have a bad outcome, right? You go back a few years earlier, the immaculate reception, right? You'll have, again, to your Raiders, again, way before our time, but the Raiders, man, in the playoffs, and then it was a divisional round as well, man. They are two of the beneficiaries of the worst calls in history. Probably the Tuck rule was a lot more egregious in that, the immaculate reception, I guess you could say either way. My point being, sometimes that happens in sports, and it is luck, right? It is luck. I think, to me personally, the legacy of the Tuck rule game, maybe Boston fans will hate me for saying this, is that there was some luck, divine intervention. I'm a big football fan, Maradona, hand of God, whatever you want to call it. There was a huge element of that, and sometimes crucial moments that allowed the dynasty to be the dynasty. Without that, you're right. Maybe Brady's gone. Maybe after that, who knows? The Raiders probably beat the Steelers, and we may have an epic Raiders-Rams Super Bowl, whatever. You never know, right? It's all the what ifs. But the point being, the call was made. Brady took advantage of that. Adam Vinatieri hits the field goal, sends it to overtime. They get the ball. Back then, there was no rule where every team had to possess the ball once. Patriots get the ball. They drive down, kick another field goal. Raiders don't even get the ball. And so, I think the legacy is that, definitely they benefited from that. But at the same time, you have to remember, they still have to win 2 more games after that, right? They had to go on the road and beat Pittsburgh, where Brady got hurt. And then they also have to beat the greatest show on turf, where they were 14-point underdogs in Super Bowl 36. So, yes, they benefited from that. But the Tuck rule game did not hand the Patriots the Super Bowl. They still have to go out and
win it. Yeah, and I think, like I said, I think it still would have led to the dynasty, maybe a little bit, would have looked a little bit different, but they had the GOAT quarterback, the GOAT head coach. He had an incredible defense, just full of Hall of Famers. It would have just delayed the process a little bit, I think, just because I don't think it would have changed anything if they lost that game. It's not like they would have gone back to Drew Bledsoe or anything like that. Maybe they don't have the confidence to go on and win those other 2 Super Bowls in this era, but what a lot of people forget, including me, before I looked into this, was that they missed the playoffs the next year. So it's not like they were just, destroying everybody in sight for the next few years. It took a while for them to get started. Maybe they're just a little bit ahead of schedule as a result of the Tuck rule.
Who represented the AFC that year?
The Raiders.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah.
Great Super Bowl. By the way, the score does not indicate how close it was. Tampa Bay, amazing defense, ran back some Gruden, pick sixes at the end, but a very close game.
Yeah.
Just, Jerry Rice, Rich Gannon probably needed a few more points. But yeah, the Raiders took full advantage of the Patriots down here, got to the Super Bowl, which to me further validates that they were the team the year before. They probably would have given the Rams a lot to handle.
That would have been a great Super Bowl. It would have been 2 incredible offenses. It would have been a different type of Super Bowl than, 2017 or whatever it was with the Rams. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. But yeah, I mean, personally, I still got that same pit in my stomach watching it happen and the injustice of it and just the irony of, if this was not in the instant replay era, which I think instant replay was just instituted a couple years before that, I think in 98 or something, this would have just been, called a fumble and we would have just been stuck with it. Just like so many other calls over the course of NFL history that would have been changed with instant replay.
100%.
So, anyway, let me wipe away my tears here. So episode 3, it's called Borrowed Time.
Okay.
This one, the synopsis is, in the wake of 9/11, the Patriots emerge on football's biggest stage, and face pressure that could unite them or tear them apart.
Sure.
So this episode starts with Bill Parcells and that early 90s Super Bowl and how he was, distracted from the team and he was upset with Bob Kraft and all that. And he ends up leaving that just shortly after that to go coach the Jets, which is just hilarious to think about. But the question I have is, why didn't Kraft and Parcells get along? And what lessons do you think he took from that in his relationship with Belichick?
That's a great question. I just want to, before I answer that, I know I've been speaking a lot, but I just want to say Brett Favre's only Super Bowl was that week where basically Bill Parcells did not have the team prepared and they still barely won. They won by 14 points. Favre was not even great that game. Desmond Howard got the MVP for that kick return. So I just want to say, for the record, I know there's a lot of Packers fans that listen to this. They're a pretty strong fan base. Love the base. Don't like the team. Like, Brett Favre's legacy is 1 Super Bowl in 15 years. Because Bill Parcells just going to get his shit together. That being said, why didn't it work out? It's interesting. Honestly, like, I look back, Bill Parcells was a heralded coach, won 2 Super Bowls with the Giants, right? Probably as big a deal as you can get, right? I mean, he's the guy who hired Bill Belichick, right? So a football savant, if you will. I think personally, again, we never know this. There's that episode, The Two Bills, which I'll have to go back and watch to answer it. I don't know if he was having personal issues, if his heart wasn't in it. But if you recall, basically when they won the AFC Championship, it was a very lukewarm celebration. And essentially, Bill Parcells knew that was the next game was his last game, regardless of the outcome. If they won even, he wouldn't have come back, which full circle goes back to the Jerry Jones, Jimmy Johnson, almost part two, right? You've maybe got these two owners, Jerry Jones and Robert Kraft. We don't know it. The way the Cowboys, everything in the Cowboys is, documented, dissected. Clearly, Jerry Jones did not like Jimmy Johnson's attitude when Jimmy Johnson said, "What did you do? I won it. I built the team." I don't know. Maybe Parcells said that. I don't want to speculate. My point being, I do feel like with owners, it gets to your head really quick, right? So, hey, we got to the Super Bowl. We competed in the Super Bowl. That was the Patriots' most successful season because the last time they made it, they got blown out. They lost by 36 points. Here, they only lost by 14. So for Robert Kraft, he's probably feeling good about himself. Like, oh my God, I bought this team 2 years ago. We're in the Super Bowl. If our coach was better, we may have won. And so Bill Parcells is probably maybe in his exit interview, he's like, you didn't do jack, right? It was me who built the team, who got the players. Maybe some of that. I know I'm speculating, so I'd love to hear your answer. But clearly the two butt heads, they did not get along. And regardless of the outcome, Bill Parcells' era in New England.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of an ego issue, right? Or not a bit of ego, just all egos, right? And Bob Kraft, he's a little bit more soft-spoken, but we know he's a guy with a big ego. All these billionaires are. It's not nothing new. I think the difference between Parcells and Belichick and the reason that they were able to get along for longer than they did versus Parcells and Kraft is that Parcells was much louder. He was he had a bigger personality. He was obviously a football savant, football genius, like you said, but he has a ton of, notable quotes, and he's gregarious in his press conferences. And I think he likes the spotlight, whereas Bill Belichick is like, I'm going to hide in my cave. If I never had to talk to you guys again, it would be too soon kind of thing. So I think that's what it was, is Parcells wanted a little more credit maybe for what he was doing. And then Kraft obviously was like, there's not enough spotlight for, you and for both of us here. So I think that's just, guys clashing. It's not nothing new in sports.
Absolutely.
So this episode wraps up with but the main focus is the win against the Rams in the Super Bowl, the greatest show on turf. It's Kurt Warner, it's Marshall Faulk, it's Isaac Bruce. Just an incredible offense, a record-setting offense, and a very good defense as well. But the question I have is, what did the Patriots do against the Rams that other teams couldn't, that allowed them to, come away victorious at the end of this game?
They take their plays. I say that with a straight face. Again, Spygate is another episode. We'll get into that. They had an advantage, man. Like, whatever you want to say, Bill Belichick doesn't talk about it. It's always booked over. I'm probably going to be called a self-hating Patriots fan. That word gets thrown around a lot, but I personally believe they had access, especially that Ty Law interception. Ty Law is a great player, don't get me wrong. He basically knew when Warner went back and went into that form, the 3-step drop and looked to the right, he knew the ball was coming there and he jumped the route, right? And that was the turning point. It was 3-0 before that. Rams were winning. Patriots get the touchdown. Rams are shocked, like an uppercut, sucker punch, right? What is going on? And they never led after that. They tied it up before the drive. So that's my number one thing. But number two, to be fair, if you want to even disregard that, they were a defensive-minded team, and it goes back to Belichick's success, right? Tom Brady, right, had 17 points in that game, 7 of which were a pick six. So really only 1 touchdown to Givens at the end of the first half. Beautiful throw, by the way. Give him credit for that. But essentially, he had 10 points, that touchdown and a field goal, right, from Vinatieri before the ending field goal. So it wasn't some offensive juggernaut. And the Rams, like you said, the greatest show on turf, won the Super Bowl 2 years earlier, right? Massive points, broke records for number of points in the regular season, putting up touchdown after touchdown, 80 yards, 70 yards, 2 of the greatest receivers in that era with Isaac Bruce and Torrey Holt and Kurt Warner, right? Bonafide Hall of Famer. I think Belichick just solved that. Now, how much you want to give credit to the Spygate or the cheating of it, I'm just going to leave that as it is. I do think he definitely had access to some of those plays beforehand. But at the end of the day, none of that goes against Tom Brady. At the end of the day, Tom Brady had to go win the game. If he spied on the Rams' entire possession, right, it's still Tom Brady having to go out and win it. I think the Spygate helps the Patriots on defense more because you're seeing what the offense is calling. It doesn't really help the offense because the defense can mix things up and you're not really getting those signals. That being said, my favorite part, rest in peace, John Madden and Pat Summerall, who that was their final game, by the way. So, just throw that out there. Final game of a celebrated duo. When they get the ball, John Madden, I think the Patriots should kneel. They don't kneel. I don't like what the Patriots are doing. 4 plays later, and now I kind of like what the Patriots are doing. And my all-time favorite, the way Summerall ended that in pure Summerallian fashion. Vinatieri, 48, and it's right down the middle. And the Patriots have won Super Bowl 36. Unbelievable. And then ends tape. To me, that is the lasting image of a great career of Pat Summerall. He's always been one of my favorite commentators, but like just to know, here I am rambling, to know some less is more. So amazing Super Bowl, great ending for that team. But yeah, personally, if you had to ask me the one reason, I think they stole the plays and they had access to the plays, because there's no way you tell me that without that, the Rams only put in 17 points. Maybe they do, maybe they don't, but there was some luck in there.
It's possible. I think the more realistic argument is it's just Belichick did what Belichick does, right? You talked about him slowing down that K-gun offense. And then he did the same with the Rams and Jared Goff. They held them to I think 7 or 8 points, something crazy like that.
3 in a Super Bowl.
Was it 3? 10-3 was the final score.
Lowest scoring Super Bowl ever. Insane.
Yeah. And I remember Brandon Cooks almost had one and Stephon Gilmore batted away. So I'm sure they'll talk about that later. But yeah, I think that he just did what he does. He punched a finesse team in the mouth. He muddied the waters. He kind of took them into the pigsty, whatever phrase you want to use. He just made things ugly, and they were the tougher team. They had the better defense, the more punishing run game, all that stuff. So
they were tougher for sure.
Time,
the Rams team were pretty
Spygate,
boys.
I think looking back on it, you're like, meh. Yeah.
Agreed.
Last question here. This one, so they make a lot of references to 9/11 in the first episode, which I thought was kind of cringy, where Bob Kraft uses 9/11 and Drew Bledsoe's injury in the same sentence as kind of a devastating time for him. I'm like, okay, bro, let's talk about what's the word here? Perspective. With what you're talking about. But do you give any credence to the conspiracy that the NFL, I guess, rigged it for the Patriots, the Patriots, red, white, and blue, all that stuff, to win the same season that 9/11 occurred? Do you give any credence to that conspiracy theory?
My personal theory is, if there was a conspiracy, why not the Giants or the Jets? 9/11 happened in New York. Now, you could make the argument that one of the planes originated in Boston, but the damage to the city was New York, which has 2 professional NFL teams, the Giants and the Jets.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything, but to your point, you're right, I'm wearing the hat, right? Red, white, and blue. The Patriots, I think, basically are like, hey, we're going to take this to our advantage. And I'll say it again, call me a self-hating Patriot fan. They basically took a national tragedy and are like, hey, we're going to use this and win some football games. Now, whether or not, people say sports brings people together, I believe that, right? I mean, people clearly were hurting after that. We all were. And so if you're a Boston fan, that's, same thing they did at the Boston Marathon, the Boston bombings in the marathon in 2013. David Ortiz goes up there and says, this is my fucking city. They win the World Series that year. So I do believe in the power of sports to heal cities and heal people. But again, the Boston Marathon makes more sense. It happened in the city. 9/11 happened in New York City, not Boston. So I do think it was definitely a little bit of a stretch to be like, maybe, maybe not. That being said, we all joke about it now. The NFL is scripted, right? Whether you want to believe it or not, that's the going phrase. So maybe there was some element of that. But personally, that was before Goodell, by the way. Paul Tagliabue was still there. I think if you really wanted to make it, that you should have done that. Or maybe the answer is that's too obvious. Pick a team near New York, right? Boston's the closest. Again, not to bring that up. For them, it was doubly, they were all the New York guys, were rooting for the Rams that Super Bowl, right? Nobody wanted.
Oh, absolutely.
So if they did intend that, then they made New York first feel bad for a second time.
Yeah. I think for both of these things, I think it's kind of Occam's razor, right? The obvious answer sometimes is the is the right answer. And I think in this point, you talked about it galvanized them. It may be the fact that they're the Patriots and they wear the red, white, and blue. So they felt some kind of, not obligation, but extra motivation, as we are now America's team because we're literally called the Patriots. So we're going to go out and do this, and it brought the team together and all that. Whatever, sports are kind of stupid, right? It can be anything. People use anything for motivation. Could be, oh, I got drafted 5th instead of 4th, so I'm going to have a chip on my shoulder, or whatever. It just, people take slights all the time, or, tragic events can galvanize a team or a player. So yeah, I think that's a more obvious and easier to digest answer. It's not as fun as a conspiracy, but
Fair enough. Fair enough.
anyway, yeah. So the last episode that we'll be discussing here is called the Spygate.
Oh,
So the synopsis is: after 3 Super Bowl wins, the Patriots are accused of videotaping an opponent's sideline signals, and things start to spiral. So the question: how much do you believe Spygate helped the Patriots, and do you think it taints the early years of the dynasty?
so great question. I want to preface it as I do often on this. The guy who basically figured out Spygate was like an ex mafia guy. Like, it's insane. I wish I remembered his name. I just saw the episode. Like, the guy like used to deal with the mafia. He was very high then on the, on the police units, crime. Like, this guy is like straight out of like a movie, right? A Hollywood movie. He's the one who found it. So to be fair, this was 2000 and it was 7. It was the year they won undefeated. So it was the 2007 season, week 1, where they're playing the Jets in New York, right? They see this. But then later on, we find out they may have done some of this in 2001 with the Rams. Who knows how long they were doing it for? It took this guy to come in, right place, right time, figure it out. That being said, I do think it absolutely puts a taint on the first 3 Super Bowls because, again, it was found out in 07. They had already won those first 3. Not going to get into the next 3 because that's later. But I think you could legitimately say that, hey, did you have access to this? Whether they did or not, people talk, right? Clearly, those tapes were there, right? We saw them in the video. Like, they're taping the guy. Goodell destroys them because he saw what he needed. Personally, I thought the punishment was pretty lax. I mean, $500,000 back then may have been a lot. Today, it's nothing, right, for these guys. And then to dock him, I think, 1 draft pick.
Yeah.
Belichick, and again, why? Because Robert Kraft was so in good favor with Roger Goodell and the NFL. If it was any other owner, maybe not Jerry Jones, I don't know, who knows? If it was any other owner, maybe he does get suspended. I was actually shocked that Bill Belichick got off scot-free, other than paying a fine. Which to Bill Belichick, that's 1 game, right? He probably makes $500,000 a game. Point being, as a Patriots fan, it absolutely puts a dent on those first 3 Super Bowls, probably more so the first one, because to be fair, they did win the 2 after with the Panthers and the Eagles. And I'm sure when the story broke, they probably went and asked those 2 teams and they didn't have anything, right? The Rams said they did. So I think it puts a bigger asterisk on the Rams, which should have probably won that game. But I think the other 2, they probably won legitimately. Or if they did, they didn't get caught. But either way, for sure, you can't discuss the legacy of the Patriots without discussing Spygate. And every time you go back, even Ernie, right? I wish I remembered his last name, Ernie, who's Bill Belichick's guy he said, hey, I'm going to take some things to the grave with me. I mean, that's telling when the guys who perpetrated it, are basically saying we're not going to say anything. Belichick is mum on it. Clearly some wrong was done. So it absolutely taints it. But at the end of the day, they still have 6 championships and nothing can take that away. Spygate or no Spygate, they still got 6 rings, just like the Steelers have 6. So, hey man, they did it. They didn't get, they got caught, but it didn't affect them.
Yeah, I think we could do a whole episode on this alone. But I think just in the interest of time, we'll kind of give like my lightning round theories here. I think the NFL and all major professional sports, there's a legacy of cheating, breaking the rules, bending the rules, and I think that's what they did here. I can say with some degree of certainty that this did help them. I mean, maybe not when they're playing, a 2-10 Jets team at the end of the season, but when you're talking about fine margins in the playoffs or the Super Bowl, where they're literally winning their first 2 Super Bowls by a field goal. I think they won the game against the Eagles by a one possession. Maybe it was 10 points. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think in those games, that's where it shows up, right? Sure. I don't think they're recording, a regular for a regular season game, unless it's a division rival, whatever it is. I think it did help them, but we can never know how much it helped them. And I think Roger Goodell, in the interest of the NFL and protecting his dynasty, destroyed those tapes. I think if we actually got to see what was on those tapes, we would definitely know what was going on. And unfortunately, we didn't because he destroyed them. So, yeah, we'll kind of never know.
Yeah. And
this kind of leads us to our second question here.
$1 million in salary since then. He's just made money. They're thinking about renewing him now. So he was thinking long-term Goodell, which, is a separate topic, but he knew what he was doing. Let me keep it at that.
Yeah, exactly. He had to protect. They always talk about protecting the shield, and what good would it do for the NFL if they were to expose a dynasty, one of the best teams in NFL history, as cheaters, right? They had to kind of punish them as much as possible, within, what we discuss as like a favor for Kraft, but without
Right.
completely saying, yeah, these guys are awful, they cheated, disregard everything that has happened for the last 4 or 5 years.
100%.
So this kind of leads us to our second question. The emergence of the Patriots as the bad guys, the evil empire.
Yeah.
Was it Spygate that changed it, or was it just, American, NFL fans or sports fans hate it when you win too much? What do you think it was?
So again, I feel like I'm uniquely qualified to answer this because I believe there's two things that drive most NFL fans. And again, maybe I'm saying Stephen A. Smith or whatever you want to say, is if their team wins the Super Bowl or the day the Cowboys get knocked out of the playoffs. Like those are national holidays for NFL fans, right? And I think it wasn't always like that. The Cowboys were not a good team, right? In the 80s. They were a good team in the 70s. They won 2. But when you win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, as they did in the 90s, their players had off-field issues, with drugs, etc., like that. But they were never accused of cheating, right? I will say this with certainty. Jimmy Johnson, Jerry Jones, that dynasty, cheating was never, discussed. They won their games fair and square, but because they won so much, they were hated, right? So I do think fast forward 10 years, I think even if there is no Spygate, whether or not the Patriots win 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, who knows? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But the very fact that they won, I think that Spygate just added to that hatred. I think even without Spygate, they're still hated because, hey, man, you're winning too much. We don't like that. But I think Spygate gives fans another reason to. And then to be fair, the Cowboys did nothing the last 30 years. The Patriots come back and win 3 more 10 years later. So it just adds fuel to that fire. But I think teams don't like when other teams win. And that's fair. That's human nature, right? You want to see diversity. You want to basically see other teams win. That's the beauty of the NFL is the parity they talk about. And how can you have parity when the same team's winning year in and year out?
Yeah. I think it's a good combination of both. And then the Spygate just gives you more ammo to hate on a team because you can say,
absolutely.
Because if they're just winning, you're like, oh, it's the refs, oh, they suck, or whatever it is. You kind of make things up. But when you're like, oh, they cheated, and we have proof that they cheated, and we see the same thing with the Houston Astros. It's the same exact thing you can point to. Like they keep winning, and we just keep hating. At least people like me who are Astros haters. But
same here.
Yeah, it just gives you ammo. Last question. So this episode wraps up with the famous or infamous for Patriots fans Super Bowl against the New York Giants. They lose 17-14. They're 18-0. They're galvanized by the Spygate. They're trying to go out there and kill everybody. And they do up until the Super Bowl. And it ends up, they lose. They get maybe a little too arrogant coming into the game, facing off against a wild card team that finished 9-7. So the question I have is, did they get too arrogant going into that game? And what's the ultimate legacy of the 18-1 Patriots?
Perfect. So I'm going to answer that backwards because I want to hit the headline. The legacy of the 18-1 Patriots is the greatest team in any sport not to win the championship. It's a debate because I'm a big fan of college basketball, not to digress. 1991 UNLV roars through the regular season, gets to the national semifinal where they killed Duke by 30 the year before. Duke beats them in the rematch. So I think that's up there too. Let's just end the debate and say, from an NFL perspective, the greatest NFL team never to win the Super Bowl. That being said, I want to reference my Cowboys thing again. That year, 2007, you have the 16-0 Patriots as the 1 seed in the AFC, the 13-3 Cowboys as the 1 seed in the NFC. I'm like salivating for this Super Bowl matchup that might come to fruition. The Giants win the wild card. I think they beat Tampa Bay or Atlanta. I can't remember for sure. They go into Dallas. They're the wild card as the 1 seed. They knock out Tony Romo. That's the famous Tony Romo, Jessica Simpson cowboy trick. They beat them. They go into Lambeau Field, beat Brett Favre in overtime, right? His legacy we already talked about earlier. Then they beat the 18-0 Patriots. I mean, to me, greatest run, in my opinion, in NFL history. That team had no business doing there. I want to go back to the week 17, though. This is when the NFL played only 16
Please
games.
Do. Yeah.
Week 17, they played the Patriots. The Giants had nothing to play for. The Patriots had nothing to play for, except the Patriots did. They were going for an undefeated season, so they technically did. The Giants were locked into that 5 seed, nothing to play for. Tom Coughlin says, no, we're going to treat this game like a playoff game, like an important game, regardless of the outcome. They only lost by 3. It was 38-35. Michael Strahan and Justin Tuck have gone on the record saying when they lost that game, they were like, we want to go at them again. We want to play them today. We want to play them tomorrow. They felt they lost that game. They could have beaten them. And you see, 38-35, that's a Patriots score. versus the 17-14 in the Super Bowl. That is a very New York Giants score. So I think having already seen them literally a month earlier, they came in. That's where defense, and in the irony of ironies, how many championships and Super Bowls has Bill Belichick won by defense? This was the one where he lost it because of defense. The defense of the Patriots could not hold the Giants, right, at the last drive. And the defense of the Giants totally took out Tom Brady from a record-setting historic offense to only scoring 14 points in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and I remember coming into the game, I think, was it Strahan or somebody from the Giants said, we're going to hold them to under 20 points.
Yes.
And Tom Brady had a very confused look at. He's like, under 20, like, who we are? And, they end up with 14.
It was arrogance. Sorry, you asked arrogance. I didn't answer.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was arrogance. It was hubris. It was arrogance to the nth degree because they're like, hey, man, you're cheaters. We're going to win every game. And, and in fact, the phrase 19-0 was trademarked the week before the Super Bowl. There was books printed, merchandise, like that was going to be the thing. 19-0 would only be the Patriots. And of course, the universe had other plans. So probably my toughest moment as a fan. But man, credit to those Giants, man. That team was something special. The run, it was not a fluke. I mean, they won game after game after game in the playoffs that they had no business in winning, going on the road twice and then beating this ultimate team. I think that's Tom Coughlin's legacy, right? I mean, I'm sure he's in the Hall of Fame. I should have done my research before coming in, but that game alone and that run puts Tom Coughlin, and it puts Eli Manning, to be honest, in the Hall of Fame. Of course, he got the second one again, which we'll talk about next time. But yeah, Eli Manning is going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback. There's no debate.
Yeah, I think so too. And the funny thing is that helmet catch, right? We didn't even talk about that being one of the most incredible, unlikely plays in NFL history. Without context, I'm thinking, as a more casual football fan, before I got a little more into things, I assumed David Tyree was, one of the better receivers on that team, all that stuff. And it turns out he had 3 catches that year in the regular season. And apparently one of my good Giants fans friends told me that, leading up to the Super Bowl, Eli Manning was gassing up David Tyree, telling him, you're going to have a big game. You're going to have a big game. So be ready, stay ready. And of course, he responds with one of the greatest catches in Super Bowl history, which turns the tide, ends up, letting them win the game. I think it was 3rd down at that point, 3rd and long. So huge play for a number of reasons. And one other thing, I'm kind of upset that you didn't mention the 73-9 Warriors as the best team to not win a championship.
Fair point. Absolutely. Yeah. That team, incredible, right? Going through the regular season. And then what did the Bulls say after that? Pippen and stuff, 73-9 don't mean a thing if you don't have the ring. But they're up there too. Last point, Tyree also caught a touchdown in that game. He got the touchdown in the 4th quarter before the helmet catch. So literally, the guy who's had 3 catches all year, 2 of his catches in the Super Bowl, 1 is for a touchdown, which gives them the lead. And then the second one is this helmet catch, which leads to the game-winning touchdown. I mean, what are the odds of that? Amazing.
Astronomical.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for hopping on. We're going to be doing the last 6 episodes, so they'll be coming out over the next few weeks.
Sure.
And we'll be doing the last 6 sometime in April, early April for you guys. So make sure to keep watching. It's an incredible show. It's a tough watch at times for Patriots haters, but it's a great watch at times for Patriots haters, like, again, when they lost this game. So appreciate you, man. Thank you so much for your time, dude.
Thanks so much, man. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to the next one in April.